Did you guys get enough chili? All right, so we're gonna, especially Billy, we're gonna make sure we work right through this because we're in an enclosed room with 80 people that just ate chili for 45 minutes. So we really need to get rolling through this. And I'll let Kurt explain that a little bit to you as we go along. So good evening. Thanks for coming out tonight. This is our one time of the year we talk about finances specifically, and that is to kind of talk through some things about the budget. Not only is this a process, but what the budget's going to look like for 2022 and how we ended for 21. So as I do every year, I want to make sure everybody knows who's on the finance team. And before we do that, though, real quick, can you guys give a round of applause for the guys that made the chili? So let's do that. Way to go. That's good. Especially Kurt's still got his blue gloves on. Those are cool. So I like that. So this is your finance team for 21. Typically, it's the elders. You've got the Brads and Bob and Chris and Gary. This year, Kurt was a part of that as associate pastor, and he's going to be an ongoing part of our finance team now. Myself as the operations pastor, and then our rotating members at large. This year, Mark Rogers, and the first year, Brenda Bolden was involved with this, so she got to have a taste of how we do the budget process. Mark will go off this year after the mid-year budget, and then Brenda will serve for another year after that. So that's our finance team for the year. So the process looks like this. The first thing I'll do is put all the budget sheets together for the teams, and I'll give those to the overseers, which are the pastors, and then they distribute those to the teams, and they give it to all the ministry team leaders. Then each ministry team leader submits a proposed budget. This is where they talk about things that they think they need, maybe some things they want for their ministry team. And not only that, they will give us a projection of what they're going to spend for the rest of the year. Excuse me. Then I'll pull all that information together after they give all that stuff to me, and we get together for a review if we need to clarify any questions about individual budgets. And then myself and the elders will get together for a pre-budget meeting, kind of talk about some of the finer points of the budget and have some questions clarified so that we have everything answered before we go to the full finance team. So I meet with those guys. They beat me up for about 6 or 7 hours, and then we go back to the finance team for the final one. Now, these are usually, we start these about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, usually get done 9:30 at night. And it's all numbers all day long, and so your eyes kind of hurt by the time you're done. So we have a good time with it, though. So really, basically, it says this. The timeline looks like start putting this stuff together about August, getting the sheets out to everybody and the information they need by September. October's a pretty busy month, but everybody's turning their information back in, and we're kind of rounding this stuff off. November will be the time when we go back and forth with the finance team to put it together, and then by December, we're getting it out to the members and for approval process. Usually by the third week or by the end of December, we're approved, ready to go and send out the membership letter. Okay? So that's kind of the timeline. It takes a good solid 5 months to get this thing ready to go. So typically from the offering standpoint, we open with prayer. We just say, God's got to guide us in what we decide what our budget's going to look like. It all starts just like if you look at a business P&L, it always starts with projecting your sales. So we don't project sales, we project offering, and we have to look at several things about this. And it's not only do we look at historical data, but we have to look at where we are year to date. So what we typically do is the one on the left. I'm going to have two things going here. The one on the left is where we are year to date. So we'll take that number by the 31st of October, and then you take the last year's numbers, typically either the last 8 or 9 Sundays, depending on how many Sundays are in December. You add those two numbers together, and that's how we come up with, let me go back one. That's how we come up with our overall forecast. And it's kind of deceiving because you see right here it says the budgeted number. When you put those numbers together, originally they start out in this box as the end of year. So you have to forecast what you're going to be by the end of the year. That becomes your budgeted number. Now at the end of the year, when you're done with the actual numbers, it may not match what you forecasted, but you've already locked in what your budget's going to be for the next year. Excuse me. Last time I did this, I just gotten off a cold too. There's something about budget that does this to me. So the first thing we'll do then is we start to after we get the offering done, we have to go through each section of the budget. So this is the administrative thing that has a lot of the fixed costs for the church in it. So everything about the HVACs and the the air conditioning, all this kind of stuff, all of our fixed costs from a utility standpoint, everything that we have to spend money on that we typically cannot control. That's what the administrative budget is. There are a few things we can control, like paper usage, those kind of things. So we'll go through this and we'll say, all right, so what are the questions? Do we have this as a need or is this a want? So that's where we have to balance that out as we go through and discuss this. So each section within the administrative budget has its own budget sheet that you have to go through. So guys, it's just a lot of breaking it down into more detail so we can understand why we're putting the money together that we're doing. We're trying to be as frugal as we can with the money that we take in from an offering standpoint. But that's the administrative budget. Then we move through each ministry team, and there's a lot of them, 22 of them. And we'll talk to the same thing where they've given us their projected spending by the end of the year. Say, we'll think we're going to spend this, and this is what I think we're going to need for a budget in 22 of the next year. So we'll go through that and say, okay, what's a need and what's a want? And we make proposals to the finance team, says, here's what we think we should do. And then we have to give feedback back to the ministry team. So you can see down at the bottom of that whole spreadsheet, they're all down along that bottom. There's a lot of ministry teams that we have to go through each budget, and it's line by line, so we talk about each item. That's why it takes a little while. Okay, so we go through the ministry teams, and then after that, there's 3 big sections of the budget that we go through, and it's landing, building, and this is stuff that we have to do for the fixed costs of our building itself, and you can see it's mortgage and taxes and utilities, repairs and maintenance, all those kind of things. Then we go through the miscellaneous, which is leadership development, those kind of things that we have to spend for special speakers, that type of stuff. And then we go into the salaries and bennies, which is talking about insurance and pension and salaries. And when we get to that section, Bob's going to talk about that a little bit for us, okay? So you get the slings and arrows tonight. Just kidding, Bob. We'll give you a microphone. All right, so then after that process, we send out a letter to the members of the church, and it usually highlights a couple things. Most of all, it's like, here's some changes to the next year. So it highlights that, and then it will go through that. It'll have a page of highlighted items, and then it will talk about the budget and give you a copy of the budget, which you have on your table. There's a copy of the letter, copy of the original forecasted budget on that table for you. So you'll notice some difference as we go through some of the stuff tonight, because we're talking about actuals versus forecasted. Okay, so just a random chili fact. This is kind of fun. I like to do these a little bit. During the 1880s in San Antonio, Texas, a Latino woman nicknamed Chili Queens sold stew they called chili, made with dried red chilies and beef from open-air stalls at the military Plaza Mercado. So if you've ever been in San Antonio, I guess that's the historic marketplace downtown in San Antonio. This is where that took place, supposedly in 1880. So a lot of history behind chili. So that's supposed to say, ooh, I didn't know that. Very cool. All right. So then we go on to the next one. Now we'll break it down by each section. So we talk about offering in general. You can see the difference now, if you look at this actual compared to your forecasted end of year in 21, there's a difference because this is I do the calculations at the end of the year. Here's what actual offering was. In that sheet would have been what we forecasted on October 31st. So the general offering came in, and this is just kind of some general information about that. We came down about 4.1% under what we had forecasted for our offering this year, which is kind of a tough hit for us. And because of that, when we did the forecast, it put us about 5% less when we forecasted 2022. Now, again, we're still at about 68% attendance, so that's part of it. I think there's a lot of information around about the offering itself, and I think that's some of the stuff I want to share tonight would be, if you look at this, I have to give an annual report to the bank every year, just because we've got a loan and there's some certain things that we have to have in place for us to have that loan through the bank. But one thing they ask for is giving units. And, I never knew that people could be called units, but giving units, and they asked for a report on that. So unfortunately, when we looked at the end of 2021, the number of giving units at Crossroads has slightly dropped. So that's probably what's going on with some of the things within offerings. So that's a little concerning, but we're just going to trust God for what we're going to do in 22. And the one thing I wanted to note on, if you look at the difference between 21 and 2019, we had about 1,000 less offerings, and that's not the total number, but it's the total number of gifts or givings. So that's where we've kind of had that drop between 2019 and last year and 21. So, and then the other thing I always like to note, remember we had the Above and Beyond campaign. That's been over now since 2020, which nobody wants to remember that year anyway. And then we just used the rest of Above and Beyond to pay off some debt for our loan. Okay, going on to administrative, a couple notes here. We're staying with Brotherhood Insurance, which handles all the umbrella, everything we insure within the building. The only thing that increased was our overall umbrella. So workers' comp and vehicles, that kind of stuff did not increase, but as you know, you probably do the same thing. All insurance costs are just going up every single year. So, but these guys are clearly in the business of taking care of churches, and it's the cheapest insurance you can get. We did have to raise our deductible from $5,000 to $7,500 to get a better rate. Otherwise, it would have been about a 12 or 13% increase. And the number 125, which is major equipment, we found a need, and this is usually, Ben is in charge of some of the stuff that when we talk about electronics within the building, but he goes by the need of people that actually use the system, and Bob uses the system upstairs. First Service uses that Mac upstairs, and the youth use it, and it was taking sometimes, 10, 15 minutes to start up. And you don't want to have a slow start. If something happens and you have to restart the computer for First Service, it's kind of nerve-wracking, but that was getting slower and slower, had to be replaced. And unfortunately, Macs are very expensive. So that was one of the reasons why we had to increase that part of our budget this year, which we've already got it replaced. Ben's got it up and running, and Stacy came down and said, I got my stuff loaded in 20 seconds? It was pretty fast. So that's what we're talking about. The next thing is software. You can see that we've got a good reduction this year, and good and bad. I mean, it's because we had a great big jump in usage for PushPay in 2020. That's gone down slightly, but overall PushPay has gone down. That's why we pay less of a surcharge for PushPay. So that takes care of that part of the software. Also, we were able to reduce some file usage in Shelby, and that was a big reduction for us, almost $100 a month. So those kind of savings add up real big for us in software. And then in those vehicle maintenance side, we've had some more maintenance on the vans than I thought we would have last year. Hopefully we'll get back in line this year, but we are carrying that extra van, which has actually come in very handy for us this year. So that was a good investment for us. And then overall in administrative charges, we were able to hold the cost down, significantly for the year. We look at this year is probably going to be still under what we budgeted last year, so I think we're going to be looking pretty good just from an administrative standpoint. And remember, that also paper charges and all these things, because our attendance is down, our contract says we can print so much in color, we're like half that. So we're well below what our contract says we can print. So that's a big savings for us. Another random chili fact, teaspoon of red chili powder. Everybody use chili powder tonight? I just want to make sure, okay. 1 teaspoon, recommended daily allowance for vitamin A. So vitamin A, important role in vision and bone growth. So hopefully you ate a lot. You guys should be able to see like a mile now tonight. So this is good. Very good. Excuse me. Land and building, real quick here. What was nice in 21, we were coming to the balloon payment on our church at the end of the year. So we needed to make sure we refinanced our loan, which Central Bank is one of the only banks, when they were Metcalf, was the only bank that would give Crossroads a loan at a 30-year loan. So we were coming towards the end of that. We refinanced, so we actually got our interest rate to drop to 3.6%. For a 5-year refinance, that was pretty good. So we actually didn't have to have a payment in August, so we saved about $25,000 not having to do a principal payment. So that was kind of nice. The way it's set up now, what we're paying, we're just about $1,500 to $2,000 less a month than what we were paying, and we are on track to pay off the loan completely in 5 years, so 2027, which is pretty cool. Utilities, they said Evergy is the one that handles the utilities for us and some of the other miscellaneous items, but since Evergy said that they were going to freeze their prices till 2023, we should be able to hold pretty steady to that for 2022 as well. So then you can expect, I'm going to assume, till 2023, then we're going to see some really fun charges from Evergy. And then repairs and maintenance, we had a nice savings. We've been doing a preventive maintenance program we started about 3 years ago, and we're just now starting to see what the savings are from HVAC and all the repairs and stuff that we have from that. So it's been a good savings program for us. Okay, then we go into the ministry teams. I want to just touch on a couple of these things. Fellowship, we had slightly increased that because we're starting to have a little more attendance coming back. So, a little more donuts. We are the donut church, so we got to have a little bit more of that. So certain things that they're going to use throughout the year. We're starting to getting back into full primetime dinners. So, thankful to Pam and her team that we're going to be able to start having primetime dinners again. So they had to make sure we put that in the budget as well. Outreach ministry. It's really cool that Brenda Bolden is now the leader for the outreach ministry team. So give her a hand. She's going to lead that baby. We're very excited to have her as the leader, and she's already got a lot of great ideas. So make sure you support her, shake her hand, and make sure she eats more of this chili. So, but she's got a couple things in the budget that we didn't have, the last year that we're going to be able to do this year, and kind of stoke the fire a little bit more on this new movers mail. So there was a couple items we wanted to do a little more with the spring outreach, and she's already got some outreach ideas that we're already going to be acting on now. So an additional little bit amount for outreach, and then set up ministry. Russell's very good about keeping us up to date and of what's going to cost. This new way of doing communion is very expensive, so we have to make sure we allow for that. If I would have known that we could have invested in that communion company back in, boy, we wouldn't even need to do an offering, guys. We'd be making a lot of money. So anyway, we have to watch that because it's a very expensive way to do communion. Sometimes very frustrating. Okay. And then the welcome team, just, it's kind of neat because we are getting back into the, you think it's a little thing, but people really appreciate the hard candy and stuff that we have out in the foyer, making sure we have the leaders have their shirts and those kinds. So Bob needed to make sure we were getting back into what that budget looked like, pre-COVID. So we're starting to see some of the things that we needed those expenses for. So it wasn't a big deal, not a lot, just slightly. And then if you guys don't remember, the missions budget is always 10% of the offering. So we allot that. That's our tithe for the offering. It goes to missions, and then and correct me if I'm wrong on this, Brad, but I think they budget 92% of that 10% so that it gives them some leeway at the end of the year. So if they're over budget, they can cover it with savings. If they're under budget, then they can actually write extra checks to some of the things that we support, like on this slide here. We already do some support things that we do for James, Luke and Jenna. Eventually, we're going to get them in Japan, hopefully. So we're waiting for them to get into Japan. But all these other things, IDES that we support, Christian Evangelization Association in Kansas, Pittsburgh State Campus, the camps, that we use down in Thayer, Kansas. So when there's excess at the end of the year, if there is, they can give a little bit of extra punch to those particular things that we support. So a lot of churches support 10, 15, 20 missionaries, and then they have to keep track of all those. We just like to keep it to the vital few that we think can impact the most people that we can, not only just for Kansas, but worldwide. So that's why we're looking at Japan, and we've been with Books and More for several years now. Okay, random chili fact, 1860. Now this says this version of chili was the prisoner's plight. And I didn't know this is one of the things they would make in the prisons in Texas. So these guys said that the inmates liked the chili so much that they would write the prisons to get the recipe, because the only thing they missed about prison was a good bowl of chili. So if you want to get incarcerated and check out Leavenworth's chili, you can just go ahead and do that. All right, so he's right down here, he's got a red mic. He's going to cover off the salaries and the Benny stuff information for you, just to make sure we have some clarity around what's going on with that this year. So, Bob,
Super.
Go ahead.
Thanks, Tracy. And if you wouldn't mind, give Tracy a big round of applause, because you can see all the stuff he puts together. We show up for the meetings, and there's binders, and there's full-color pamphlets of things, and it's all tabbed up and stuff, and it's really good. And it all adds up. So I want to cover a portion of the budget, and as I cover this portion, I just want to go back and refer. This isn't an oral test or anything, but I want to refer to some of the things Tracy's already said, because the way we do our giving estimate is one that I really respect about the church, and it's a bit of a conservative way of doing it, which says whatever we got in the last 12 months, we're going to expect to get in the next 12 months, and we're prayerful about that. But we could take an approach that says, well, let's assume we're going to get a lot more. Let's assume that the church is going to grow by 10%, and we could inflate our expectation on the giving side, which would allow us to then spend a bunch more money on the expense side. But we try to stay conservative with the idea that if giving does increase during the year, that's a benefit that then we can apply to some of the things that we might have cut out of the budget. And then when we go into the expense side, we're looking at things that we have to pay for, like electricity and the utilities and the stuff that runs the buildings, things that we pay for the mission of the church, including our missions, but also including the ministries. And those are things, too, where we look at very thoughtfully and prayerfully, because as we cut expenses there, we don't want to cut out the opportunity to save a soul or to bring new people in or to grow the discipleship within. So we want to make sure that we're making those investments with the idea that hopefully some of the outcome of that would be tithing and giving on the upside. So one of the things we then look at is the salary piece. And this is where the non-staff portion of the finance team, and I'm part of the non-staff elders, and then the two representatives, are prayerful, but thinking about, okay, what can we do from a staff perspective? And we take this very seriously because, as you guys can agree, the staff is one of the most critical pieces to the success of our mission here, to what Crossroads is doing. But as Tracy had said, we were surprised in 2020. We were surprised in 2020 when, coming into the pandemic, the giving didn't really suffer the way that we initially expected it would. And so we were blessed by that, and God is great, and great things happen. In 2021, as we were hoping and expecting that would continue, that's where, unfortunately, we've seen a decline in the giving, and that forced some hard decisions in terms of how we look at the budget going into 2022. And so the non-staff finance team made the hard decision not to grant salary increases to the staff this fall, as we were looking at a gap, a significant gap, in terms of what we were estimating the giving to be and the expenses that we felt we needed to sign up for the health and stability of the church. And that gap is resonating in the sheets that you guys see. We're actually estimating in the budget that we're going to spend more in 2022 than we're currently expecting to see as income. And that's happened in the past, but not as significantly as this. And so that's where we looked at the staff element. We said, gosh, we're already seeing a deficit in the budget, and we made the hard decision not to increase that deficit right now going into 2022, not knowing what Omicron was going to do, not knowing what the pandemic was going to look like. But we're still prayerful and hopeful that good things can happen and God will be good. And so we decided to set another meeting up at the end of the first quarter to revisit. And if the trending for our giving is exceeding what we were expecting last fall, and we're seeing goodness, then we'd like the opportunity to consider new decisions into the budget, which we'll make certainly you guys aware of. But we want to revisit that going into the second quarter and probably throughout this year, to the point where hopefully we'll see some trending that would allow us to maybe make a different decision of some sort. So, and I don't know if you guys have any questions about that or if that made sense. We don't take this lightly, and it's a hard thing to think about with the staff, but also, prayerfully and based on my knowledge of the staff, I know that their hearts are in this for God and for the glory of God, and so I don't, think that they're looking for a decision that would put the church at more risk financially based on what we're trying to accomplish here. I don't want to speak for them, though, but. All right. Well, thank you guys for that piece.
Good. Thanks, Bob. So if you look at, and I understand he just talked about, zero increases for the pastors, and I know that it's kind of deceiving because if you look at the 22 budget versus what we spend at the end of the year. Remember, that's only a half a salary because we brought the associate pastor in mid-year. So now we've got the full year on there. Plus, insurance costs always go up. So nothing else went up. The pension didn't change, and the salaries won't change. It's just a matter we're just picking up a full year. So that's why that's different. But it is, if you look at this variance, if you look at this year that we just ended in 21, look at where we were. We said we were going to miss by 35,000 when I stood up and did the presentation last year, and we said, God can do some amazing things, and look where we ended up by the end of the year. Now that's missing on a 4.1% miss on offering. So the ministry team leaders, the ministry teams together, the staff, everybody involved in what we do and operate the church really dug their heels in and said, you got to focus on that need versus want. So we tried to make sure that everybody tightens their belt when the budget gets tight, correct? So that's what we did, and we ended up beating. I mean, that's a $70,000 swing. So I think they did a great job. We're very proud of them, and God just does some amazing things. He always does, doesn't he? Every time I come up and do it, it's like God does some amazing things every year, and we always get to see it. So keeping that in mind, I'm looking at next year. This is what we're looking at. We think that God can lead us through that, but we've got to figure out what's going on. We don't know what's going on with why giving patterns are changing and what's going to happen with attendance and all this kind of stuff. So these are real concerns. We need a lot of prayer. You guys, and this is kind of the core here that comes to hear this thing every year. This is the core group that needs to pray for this and say, what can we do? Brad's never been the guy that stands up here and begs for money. He's just never been that kind of a guy. And I think this is about what's in people's hearts and what their priority is. And we just need to say, God, you just need to move. And you need to move in the people. And so we'll just figure out how that works. Now, what that means at the end of the year, that could mean a lot of things. A lot of churches, say that you're supposed to be anywhere from 48 to 55% of your budget should be salaries. And we've always hung around that 49%. So we've always been good. But this is the first year, we've had to creep into that 51 to 52%. We're starting to creep up there. So if this happens, if we start getting to the end of the year and we're forecasting out to miss that kind of a number, guys, this is where you start talking about staff cuts and all that kind of stuff. So this is a year that's going to be, we have to sit back and kind of look at that stuff. So, yeah, what a downer, huh? I'm sorry. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. Brad, do you have any final thoughts for anything else on here? Oh, there you go.
There you go. All right. Hey, that sounds good. I could probably sing with this. Do it. Yeah. There we go. We're already getting money.
Start an auction?
So,
Give me the five.
So, just want to say a couple things. And, you've heard, if you've heard this once, from various sources, I'm talking outside the church, maybe even inside the church, but these last couple years have been unprecedented. I've been in ministry, if you count the time that I was in college and started in a small one-room schoolhouse church, 40 years. This is 40 years now. And these last 2 years, never seen anything like it before. This whole COVID thing and people staying home and being encouraged every day, multiple times a day, don't go out needlessly and interact with people and, all that kind of stuff. And I know it's kind of ebbed and flowed in the last year, but that first year, man, that was such an emphatic message. And while this has happened in the last 2 years, we've been talking about, among the leadership, we've been talking about in the last 4 or 5 years that there is a dynamic that is happening in American churches that is a new dynamic. from any of the pastors that are out there, no matter how long they'd served. They just hadn't seen this. And it's a mindset shift that started happening a number of years ago, where the idea of being a regular church attender is being redefined, and people are dropping back in their attendance. Used to be, if you had 4 or 5 Sundays a month, if you were a regular full-time church member, you were at church 3 or 4 Sunday mornings a month, and you were there Wednesday night or Sunday nights and stuff like that. But now things are getting to where going once or twice a month. And this is without COVID in the picture. And this is what we've been talking about 4 or 5 years ago. Going once or twice a month, people define that as being a full-time regular church attender. And that's not even doing anything like prime times and small groups and stuff like that. And so that was kind of the challenge that we were looking at. Not just us, but North American Christian Convention was here in town. You remember we took a ton of volunteers to help out with that down at Bartle Hall. And Gene Apple, who was the president from Anaheim, California, I talked to him for a while about it, and he goes, oh yeah, this is happening across the country. They're experiencing it, Southern California, everything as well. Okay, so that was like 5 years ago. Those kind of conversations were happening. Well, now on top of that, we've got this COVID thing going on. And so now you have people being told to stay home and all of this. And we got people with compromised health that are trying to be cautious. And I totally get that. And I know you understand that as well. But the thing is, unfortunately, when something drags on long enough, which this has, bad habits start developing. Now, in the contacts that I've made, and I know other staff and others of you have made contacts with people that we haven't seen around here in a long time, and we get reassurances that, oh, they're coming. And I never know who's given, so I have no idea, financially who of you gives or what you give or something like that. And so once in a while, I'll be told, oh yeah, I don't think they've turned their back and walked away, because I think they're still giving. I'll hear that without any details once in a while. And so there's a little bit of reassurance, that I'll get like that. But the reality of the matter is, when the dust settles, that's when we're going to know really what it is that we're facing, And I'm not just talking about Crossroads. I'm talking about American churches across the country. Because we've got two dynamics that have kind of, really hit their stride right at the same time. COVID and this other trend that's had a few years running, developing. And so what I want to challenge you to do is to be praying. I'm really praying this year is the breakthrough year, okay? Whether you want to use some of the terminology some people use that this, what's the latest variant? Omicron. Whether this Omicron is the COVID neutralizer, or, sometimes you hear people saying stuff like that. And a lot of times people that get that, it's not as severe. And I know that's across the board, that's not true. But Colette and I, we both had it, right at New Year's. And it definitely wasn't severe, for us, go through that. But part of the hope in this, the prayer in this, is that this year is the breakthrough year, so that we can really see what we're dealing with as the dust starts settling. And we start seeing, how many people are just still being very cautious, and we're not ever seeing them, and then they start coming back. Or how many people have just developed bad habits. And now we've got that challenge to creatively come up with ways to help them to get back in the groove again. And so I want to just invite you to be praying along with the staff, with the leadership team, about this regularly. Just make it a regular matter of prayer. God can use COVID. He can use all of this stuff to his glory, and that should be a part of our prayer. is that, when all this shakes out, in the end, we're going to look back on it and we're going to be like, oh, God had a plan all along, and we just didn't see it. And so let's just pray, put it in his hands, and make ourselves available. When you think of someone that you remember seeing around here but you hadn't seen in a while, don't hesitate to reach out to them, whether it be a text or a phone call or an old-fashioned card or whatever. Reach out to them, because I know in times that I've done that, I've got nothing but gratitude in return. People just appreciate it, that somebody's thinking of them. And so help us out with that, because I think that can be, maybe not solve everything, but that can definitely be a difference maker in this, okay? We do have a challenge. The deficit, the total number on that bottom line was what?
Minus 104,000.
104,000, yeah. But, we had, a 35,000 deficit last year, and we didn't go in the negative because of the things that Tracy explained. So we really haven't gotten burnt financially from this yet, but let's make this a matter of prayer, and not just in regards to the finances, but ultimately we're talking about impacting this community and beyond for Christ, and helping people come to know Christ. And I just feel like, man, if we can just kind of get this COVID thing kind of slid aside, it's hopefully going to open up some new avenues that people, for whatever reason, have become receptive to that maybe they weren't over 2 years ago. All right? Okay.
Very good. Anybody have any questions? Since he's got a mic, if you have something we can ask or try to answer. I really appreciate you guys' time. I know how much fun it is to sit through a financial review. It's always a good time, especially on the Rubbermaid chairs. That's really good. So if you need to stand up and run out of the room, I understand that. Okay, so I don't see any questions. You guys, thank you so much. Like Brad said, pray for the staff and pray for the church, but most of all, pray for the community. If you know somebody, reach out. I mean, nothing says more than somebody just tapping them on his shoulder and said, I haven't seen you for a while. I'd really like to see you come back to church.